Recording. Okay, well, welcome everyone to our December Next Gen Zoom webinar about winter flying. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to all attend this webinar that we've been trying to do monthly this year during the pandemic. We have two lovely presenters today. We have Susan Sherman and Carol Zerbe, who will be talking about winter flying, which I think is a very relevant topic, being that it's December in Alaska. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep it short and hand it over to you guys.
Thank you, Jackie.
You got it.
I'm so glad that you're with the Airmen's now. And for those of you who don't know, Jackie is also a CFI, and she takes that job very seriously. And I'm so proud of you for doing that. And let me introduce my co-presenter, Susan. Susan Sherman is a pilot for Alaska Airlines. And Susan contacted me earlier this year to do some float flying and then some winter ski flying and little tailwheel refresher in her Flying Club 180. Susan, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, like you said, I fly for Alaska Airlines. I have lived in Alaska for about 6.5 years now. So while I have a fairly extensive background in GA, none of it is recent, and flying in Alaska is very new to me. So a little bit intimidating, but I joined this flying club after I got my float rating and have access to a Cessna 180 and super fun on floats. And then when it went on wheels in between seasons, I needed to get refreshed on wheels, and we'll have to do so again on skis. So, but yeah, I've been a flight instructor and done a little bit of backcountry flying when I lived in Oregon, some backcountry strips and tailwheel stuff there.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. And we're going to get more into Susan's story in a bit here. My name's Carol Zerbe. I am an Airmen's board member, and I also am on the Next Gen board. And I'm glad you all are joining us tonight. I have been flying professionally in Alaska for over 20 years, and recently this year became a FAA designated pilot examiner. And I love being a CFI, and I love flying skis. And anyways, I hope that this is useful for you all. I think it will be. When you start to research these questions on your own on the internet, you'll discover dozens of chat room strings on these topics. So I figure there's a need out there for the information. And otherwise, we all just learn the hardest way on our own experience. So why not learn from the experience of others? It's cheaper, right? So we're going to attack this tonight as a little bit of a story form. So Susan's going to share with us an adventure we had together a few weeks back, and then the learning that occurred throughout that process. So I'll just get going here. So there's definitely a learning curve associated with winter flying. And this is not intended to be a seminar on how to fly the plane in cold weather. It's not about operating it at all as the pilot. It's about getting it ready for the winter conditions prior to takeoff, okay? There's a lot to know about that. Oh, stand by. Here we go. So here's the sorts of things we think about with Alaska flying, maybe. I don't know what you guys think about with winter flying, but these are the sorts of things that I live for. To me, there's nothing better than spring ski flying in Alaska. Here we have a glacier in the Prince William Sound area. And here we have a glacier back in the Talkeetna Mountains. And Talkeetna Mountains again, and somewhere unnamed on the Kenai Peninsula. Susan, why don't you tell us just a little bit about how we got the idea for this talk? Tell us about our adventure or misadventure.
Well, you mentioned all of the things that there are to know about getting the plane ready to fly, and I think that I found them all on the first day.
we ran into pretty much the toughest scenario I've ever run into as far as having to do all of the stuff. So fill us in.
These, unfortunately, I did not take before and after photos of the plane when Carol flew. Carol flew with me. These photos were staged last week after it's been nicely covered up. When I booked Carol to go fly with me, I knew that there would be some work to do to get the plane ready to go. She asked me if the plane had wing covers, and I assumed that it probably did. I know that other people in the club fly the plane in the winter, and I assumed that they were somewhat prepared for that. However, the morning that I went out to the airplane to get ready to fly, it was covered with 8 to 10 inches of snow on top of a thick layer of rough ice. So I got to work sweeping snow off the plane, had no idea what we were going to do about the ice. But I just kept going to town until Carol showed up and had quite the look on her face when she rolled down her window when she pulled up. We looked at each other, and she got to work and helped me get the snow cleaned off. So our first plan was to get all the snow off the plane, taxi it over to her hangar where it could defrost, and then we could go fly. It took us so long to do all this that the plan got modified to defrost it and then fly it the next day. By the time we got it clean enough to go to taxi it, we opened the door and discovered that the master switch had been left on and the battery was dead. So at this point, we've been at work for about 3 hours, I think, sweeping snow off the plane. 3 hours, 2 hours. It was a good long time. And the battery was dead. So there we were.
Do you want me to cut in now, Susan?
Yeah, it's a good time.
Okay. All right. So, so the mechanic had to come and charge the battery. Not quite as simple as charging an automobile battery. I am not a mechanic, just a pilot, but I know that I've had my mechanic yell at me for charging my aircraft battery incorrectly. So then I researched it because I don't want my mechanic mad at me, and I want my battery to last as long as possible. They're not cheap. So, but let's say that there are several ways to start your aircraft in this instance. However, before taking any action in an airplane, right, we have to think about what would be the ultimate result if we needed a backup system, such as, let's say we took off on a jump start for our battery, which we'll talk about in a minute, a number of different ways that we could do that. But we haven't had sufficient time for the engine-driven alternator to recharge our battery system. Let's just say there's some sort of emergency and the engine quits. Well, sometimes we try to fix this with a number of different emergency action items, one of which is cranking the starter, which guess what? Won't work if your battery has not been sufficiently recharged enough to crank the starter. Now, in Alaska, that's not necessarily considered an emergency. Lots of people fly around without a battery at all so that they can lighten their Super Cub, for instance. However, that in most places in the world would be considered an emergency. So just think about what the down the road consequences would be. But as you can see, there's a number of options that we could use to charge our battery. These are wonderful little units that you can buy all over the place. I bought one at Costco a while back, and it's really saved me from a couple times when my battery way in the back of my airplane was so cold that it just didn't have the starting amps to get the job done. And so something like this can come in real handy when you're stuck in the wilderness or somewhere else. And it's like, well, it might be somewhat of an emergency, but I got to get out of here. So there's that. If you happen to be on a ramp somewhere or at an airport that has the ability to give you an item like this, then there are start carts, if you will, or external power sources that some aircraft you can plug directly into an external power source outlet. And there's other ways to jumpstart a battery directly to it. However, that's ultimately not the best thing because of the lack of emergency backup once you're in the air. And also, it's not the kindest of batteries. So what is? Well, after my mechanic yelled at me, I began to study this matter. And there may very well be people listening to this who have better ideas than this. And in aviation, there's often many ways to accomplish a thing. There's not only one right way, usually. So an aviation-specific battery charger has the correct charging voltage for aircraft batteries. So something to think about. Later on, I'm not going to be clicking on all of the many links that I've included in this presentation, but eventually this recorded presentation will be available to you all on Airman's social media and the Airman's website. And then you can go and do more research as much as you want on this presentation. And there's several pages of this presentation where you could go pretty deep. An item that can help with a battery losing its amperage capability, which can occur even if you have a full voltage. If you turn on your voltmeter and you say, wait a minute, I've got 12.5 volts, or whatever it is for your system, you still might not have starting amps, as you can see here. So you have for instance, in my airplane, the battery's way in the back of the tail. So you have more resistance as the power is going all the way up through the front of the aircraft. And so one way that I can mitigate that is with a battery warmer. There are a number of different ways to warm a battery. There's battery-shaped heating pads that then you uninstall prior to takeoff. This is something that's permanently installed, and therefore, because it is installed in the airplane, this one's FAA approved. That gets us to engine preheaters. That talks about the battery problems. Susan, do you want to tell us what happened after that? I can't remember now. We started it to take it to a hangar.
We wanted to take it to your hangar. So we finally got it clean enough. John was kind enough to come out and charge the battery before we got to it the next morning. And so when we got out there, he had charged the battery and removed whatever he used to charge it with. I don't even know what that was. But the battery was charged. And we did have an engine heater plugged in, but we found the engine heater in the clubhouse and plugged it in. So it would be warm enough to get the plane, to start the engine to taxi it over to your hangar.
Yes, so there's multiple levels of preparedness. And the reason we had to taxi to the hangar was that despite our best efforts, because the airplane had been parked for a good month, I believe, with as fall turned to winter, it had been parked without any covers on. And so what we discovered was just an impenetrable mass. And the only way to have dealt with it would be to go over to International, basically, and have a full de-ice truck de-ice it, or put it in the hangar. So I was able to utilize some hangar space and get this done. But before we could even get it to the hangar, first of all, we had to recharge the battery and make sure that the engine was hot enough so that we wouldn't be harming it by starting it in the, well, I think it was about 10 degrees temperature with some cold wind.
Yeah, it was pretty cold. It was 10 or 15 degrees, a little bit of an icy wind. And we did find the engine heater in the clubhouse and put it on the night before with the preheater plugged in.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm trying to remember what kind that was. You'll have to tell me when we see it.
Yeah, I don't remember what kind it was.
Right. So there's a number of different ways to get your engine preheat done. My dad, who's an old A&P mechanic and pilot in Fairbanks, where it's regularly 40 below, he always said, and he had larger Cessnas with big engines, he always said, you don't need anything else other than an oil pan heater and an engine cover. It's fine. Now, I think that he was saying that in conjunction with using a blower heater beneath a tarp. prior to takeoff, so that he could raise the overall ambient temperature in the block. But, you know, if you were in a place a little bit less severe than Alaska, then most people would agree with that statement, because the oil pan heater does, over time, warm soak the block just somewhat. But engine manufacturers, different specifications, their handbooks about how cold you may start their particular engine. Most Continentals, for instance, are plus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. However, most people think, well, it's kinder to the airplane to heat it up closer to 70 degrees or closer to operating temperature, because that's where it's really supposed to, that's what it's built for, is for operation. So let's just go over a second about oil pan heaters, and we'll continue on to some of the other types. So the oil pan heater, I went with this when I had a Piper Pacer and I was on a beer budget. So I couldn't afford to have wine taste. So I bought an oil pan heater, and you can apply it using various methods. Here's an oil pan heater that I found on Aircraft Spruce, it looks like it is. It is important that you think about doing this if you don't have a hanger available to you. You think about doing this well before the temperatures are cold, because the application method will not cure unless it is pretty dang close to room temperature. So engine oil pan heaters, the way to use them, it takes some time. It's not going to happen instantly. But then again, that is the best way to heat an engine, is by warm soaking it, if you will. Not just a 1 hour blast is ideal. So time required, depends how cold it is, but it won't hurt it to plug in for overnight. If you have, and I would highly recommend that if you have a oil pan heater, that it be thermostatically controlled, meaning it will turn off or regulate itself above a certain temperature. If you have that, you can just turn it on and leave it for overnight. It's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to boil your oil or anything like that. If you prefer, people also use a timer and simply plan on it going on the night before they fly, or the morning early of their flight. Some people utilize a remote system, and I think I have a picture of one of those later on. A big perennial question is, what if the weather isn't good enough and I can't go flying? Then what do I do? Now the chat rooms will go on endlessly about this, but the main enemy we don't want to have here is condensation. So the idea of keeping it plugged in, not going flying, and then you have a warm engine sitting there. If you unplug it, then you're going to have cold air increasing, which is going to cause condensation. So some people would say that if you can't go flying, then leave it plugged in. How long is too long? Well, it's hard to say. There are probably some people on this forum who have some strong opinions about that. And they might have very well-informed reasons for it. But personally, I have left mine plug in for a long time. A lot of people would say just a few days might be too much. Being that if you do not have a thermostatically regulated pad, that it could make things too hot in your oil pan. Food for thought. I think it's less of a problem if you do have a thermostatically controlled oil pan. The creme de la creme of engine preheaters is what was on Susan's airplane. And this is a block heater made up of wires that go around the cylinders and an oil pan pad. This reef preheat system is pictured here. There's a bunch of information available on the website that covers way more information that we can cover in this presentation. But these are thermostatically controlled oil pan pads. And this is the ideal solution for warm soaking your engine over a period of time. But as you can see, it is only available if you have electricity. So if you're out in the bush or spending the night on a glacier or whatever else, you don't have that, then you have to come up with some other solutions. I guess I just threw that in there. Oh, because you're near the access door to where you plugged in the heater.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes they run them down through the cowl flap. Sometimes they run them up there. It just sort of depends on the installation of your engine. And here we have more options on more of a beer budget for engine preheaters that are electric. So these are often used in conjunction with other heaters, sometimes solo. And I think you'll see what I mean. So an incandescent bulb will give off plenty of heat if you give it time. These can be used in the engine compartment, or if there's room, or in the cabin. And the benefit to this is that it provides a long soak of heat, which is what we're going for, which overall is better than a quick blast for the engine. Here we have a space heater, a little buddy, which is very common in the aviation world. Hair dryers are sometimes used. Back when I was first starting to have these questions, I was recommended to use a hair dryer. I researched it a bit more, and it may not be the best idea for your expensive investment of an airplane, but people do use them. These I use under the instrument panel of my airplane. I just leave it on the floor, sort of directing up towards the instrument panel, because for about an hour prior to departure or so, and that is a lot kinder on the instruments and the gauges, and it's kinder to the occupants when we get in. But you can also use this to heat, over a course of a few hours, to heat the engine if you can find a place to put it. Some engine compartments, there's room at the top where you check the oil, and some have to be directed into the cowl flaps. It's really dependent. So now, what if you're out in the field? There's a number of really cool options available to us. Here we have the Northern Companion, available from F. Dodge. And this is a very fancy version of some things that bush pilots have made on their own for a while. It's beautifully done, as everything is from F. Dodge. Here you see it runs off of a standard camping stove, which is great because your survival equipment is already there with your camping equipment. You don't have to bring two pieces of equipment. One stands in for both. So that's pretty cool. And an advantage of a lot of these stoves is that you can utilize the fuel right from your wing if you need to. So you don't have to carry fuel necessarily. And here you see it put together. This is kind of an unusual picture in that it's showing it directed into one side of a twin engine airplane. But I couldn't find a picture of it with a Super Cub, which is its most natural environment. This is the type of stove that I'm talking about. You have to make sure you get a multi-fuel stove. Another non-electric type of engine preheater would be a propane unit such as the Red Dragon. Again, this is a fast blast type of heat. And if there's any open flame at all, then most people wouldn't really leave their airplane unattended, just in case. But it's something that's out there. It's fairly heavy and bulky, but it just sort of depends what you're able to get your hands on and what type of operation you're running. It might be something great for you. Cabin heaters. Like we said, it's kinder to the airplane to heat things up. Everything wants to break in the cold, from door handles to everything else. So here is a ceramic heater that you can purchase very commonly, and that works just great. And again, I often put it underneath the instrument panel, but it depends what you need to heat. Oh, also, this picture was supposed to be bigger. This is, oh, here it is. I can't see this behind everybody else. I have your faces over here. Anyway, we have another form of cabin heater. And you know what? This works just fine if you give it time.
Yeah, not to cut you off here. It looks like Abby switched the account. So it looks like this meeting's going to end in a minute. But if everyone can just stay here for a second, or shoot me an email at NextGen. I could continue and create a new meeting. I was just on the phone with Abby because I guess she switched it to the